The name D.B. Cooper echoes through time. It's a name whispered with a mix of awe and intrigue. He's the man who committed the perfect crime. Or did he? He boarded a plane one chilly November night. He had a plan, a daring one. He asked for money. He asked for parachutes. Then he simply vanished into the dark sky. No one ever saw him again. Not really. His actions created a legend that day, a legend that still captivates us all. I am Mr. Obscuro, and this is the story of D.B. Cooper. He walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. It was in Portland, Oregon. He bought a one-way ticket, flight 305 to Seattle. The ticket was under the name Dan Cooper, a simple name, an unremarkable name. He paid in cash. He looked to be in his mid-40s. He wore a business suit, black or dark brown. He had a white shirt and a black tie. He carried a dark overcoat and a briefcase. Just another man on a journey. He boarded the aircraft. The Boeing 727 was ready for its short hop. He found his seat. Seat 18C, some reports say, or maybe 18E or 15D. Accounts vary. What's clear is he settled in. He was quiet. He ordered a drink, a bourbon and soda. He even smoked a cigarette. Flight attendants remembered him. They said he was calm, polite even. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing to cause alarm. He was just another face in the crowd. He blended in perfectly. Other passengers were settling down too, reading newspapers, chatting quietly, thinking about their destinations, thinking about Thanksgiving. No one paid much attention to the man in the suit. He seemed like any other businessman. The plane was in the air, cruising towards Seattle. Then, Dan Cooper made his move. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply handed a note to a flight attendant. Florence Schaffner was her name. She thought he was giving her his phone number at first. She slipped it into her pocket. He leaned closer. "Miss, you'd better look at that note," he said. "I have a bomb." His voice was low, but his message was terrifyingly clear. The note spelled out his demands. His words were precise. He wanted $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary chutes, 2 reserve chutes. He wanted them by 5 p.m. When the plane landed in Seattle, he was serious. He showed the flight attendant a glimpse of wires and red sticks in his briefcase. It looked like a bomb. The crew had no choice. They had to comply. The lives of everyone on board were at stake. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. It was kept away from the main terminals. The passengers were scared. But Cooper kept his cool. He allowed the other 36 passengers to leave, in exchange for the money and parachutes. The FBI scrambled to meet his demands. The cash was gathered. The parachutes were found. Once on board, Cooper checked everything. He was thorough. Then he ordered the plane to take off again. Destination Mexico City, flying low and slow. But they never made it to Mexico City, not with Cooper anyway. About 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, somewhere over southwestern Washington state, in the dark, rainy, and windy night, Dan Cooper did the unbelievable. He opened the aft air stairs of the Boeing 727. He stepped out into the freezing wind, with the ransom money strapped to him. He jumped. He vanished into the vast, rugged wilderness below. The day was Wednesday, November 24th, 1971. The place was Portland International Airport in Oregon. A man, looking to be in his mid-40s, approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He was neatly dressed. He wore a dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a narrow black tie. A dark overcoat was draped over his arm. In his other hand, he carried an attaché case, a common sight for businessmen of that era. He seemed like any other traveler on a routine trip. He wasn't drawing any attention to himself. He simply waited his turn. He requested a one-way ticket. His destination was Seattle, Washington, a short flight. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. The ticket agent processed his request without a second thought. In those days, purchasing an airline ticket was a much simpler affair. No photo identification was required. You could pay in cash and walk right on, and that's exactly what Dan Cooper did. He handed over $20 for his ticket. He received his boarding pass. He was now officially a passenger, ready to board. His alias was simple, forgettable even. The airport buzzed with activity. It was the day before Thanksgiving. Many people were traveling to be with their families. There was a sense of holiday anticipation in the air. Children were excited. Parents were perhaps a little stressed, juggling luggage and little ones. Business travelers like Cooper appeared to be were mixed in. Most people were focused on their own journeys, their own plans. They hurried past the man in the dark suit. He remained an anonymous figure in the bustling crowd. His true intentions were hidden behind a calm facade. Section 2. Aboard Flight 305. Soon, the announcement came. Northwest Orient Flight 305 to Seattle was now boarding. Passengers began to gather their belongings. They formed a line at the gate. Dan Cooper joined them. He was just one of many. He showed his boarding pass. He walked down the jet bridge. He stepped onto the Boeing 727-100 aircraft. It was a popular and reliable jet. Its registration was N467US. The cabin crew greeted passengers with smiles. Everything was perfectly normal, or so it seemed to everyone else on board that afternoon. Cooper made his way down the aisle. He found his assigned seat. Reports vary, but it was likely seat 18C in the rear section of the plane. This location was significant. It was close to the aft air stairs, a unique feature of the Boeing 727. He settled into his seat. He placed his overcoat and attaché case in the adjacent seat, 18D, or perhaps stowed the coat. He fastened his seatbelt. He looked like any other passenger preparing for a short flight. He was quiet. He was composed. He didn't interact much with those around him. As the plane filled up, flight attendant Florence Schaffner noticed him. She was working in his section of the cabin. Cooper caught her attention after the plane was airborne. He ordered a drink, a bourbon and soda. He paid for it. He even lit a Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette. He was polite. He was unassuming. There was nothing about his behavior to suggest any trouble. Florence, or Flo as she was known, would later recall him as being rather nice. He wasn't agitated. He wasn't demanding. He was just another passenger. The final passengers boarded. The cabin doors were closed. The jet bridge pulled away. The usual pre-flight announcements were made. The demonstration of oxygen masks and life vests. The reminder to keep seatbelts fastened. The engines spooled up with their familiar whine. Most passengers were probably thinking about Seattle, about their connections, about Thanksgiving dinner. They were completely unaware that the man in seat 18C was about to change their flight. Section 3. The Quiet Ascent. The Boeing 727 taxied to the runway. It paused for a moment. Then the engines roared to full power. The plane accelerated down the tarmac. It lifted gracefully into the gray, overcast Pacific Northwest sky. Flight 305 was en route to Seattle. The flight was scheduled to be very short, only about 30 minutes. The seatbelt sign remained on for the initial climb. Passengers chatted quietly. Some read newspapers or magazines. The routine hum of the engines filled the cabin. It was a typical afternoon flight. Dan Cooper sat quietly in his seat. He watched as the plane gained altitude. Portland and the Columbia River receded below. He may have looked out the window, or perhaps he was focused inward, going over his plan one last time. He waited. He needed the right moment. He wasn't impulsive. He was methodical. The flight attendants would soon begin their in-flight service for the short journey. He appeared calm. His face betrayed no emotion, no hint of the audacious act he was about to commit. The seatbelt sign eventually blinked off. Passengers were now free to move about the cabin if needed. Flight attendants began to move through the aisles. They offered beverages. They collected trash. The atmosphere was relaxed. For Cooper, this was the window of opportunity he had been waiting for. He had to act before the plane began its descent into Seattle. He needed enough time for his demands to be met. The timing had to be precise. Every detail mattered to the success of his dangerous gambit. Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant who had taken his drink order, was nearby. She was attending to other passengers. Cooper watched her. He waited for her to pass his row. He needed to get her attention without alarming anyone else. He didn't want to cause a panic, not yet. His plan relied on control, on compliance. He reached for his attaché case. The moment had arrived. The calm before the storm was about to end. He was ready to make his move. The Legend of D. Section 1. The Fateful Note. As Flight 305 soared, Dan Cooper made his move. He handed Florence Schaffner a note. She read it. "I have a bomb." Cooper showed her the briefcase. It looked real. Florence informed the captain. The crew decided to cooperate. The hijacking was now officially underway. Dan Cooper remained remarkably calm. He wasn't agitated, he wasn't aggressive. He spoke in a low, even voice. This composure was perhaps more unnerving than if he had been shouting. He knew what he wanted. He was in control. He instructed Florence Schaffner to sit beside him. This allowed him to communicate his demands clearly. He also wanted to ensure she didn't alert the other passengers unnecessarily. Panic among the passengers was the last thing he or the crew wanted. His demeanor helped maintain a fragile sense of order in the cabin, at least for the moment. His demands were specific. He wanted $200,000 in cash. The bills had to be unmarked, and they had to be in $20 denominations. This was a large sum of money in 1971. Gathering it quickly would be a challenge. He also demanded 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes, the kind skydivers used, and 2 reserve parachutes. The request for 4 parachutes was peculiar. Did he have an accomplice, or was it a diversion? The crew relayed these precise demands to Northwest Orient Airlines officials on the ground. The FBI was alerted immediately. The clock was ticking. While the authorities on the ground scrambled, Cooper dictated more instructions. He wanted the plane to land at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He wanted it refueled. He specified that the money and parachutes should be ready upon their arrival. He seemed to possess some knowledge of aviation. He knew the capabilities of the Boeing 727. He even knew about the aft air stairs, a unique feature of that aircraft model. The flight crew did their best to keep the other passengers calm. They were told there was a minor mechanical issue. Few knew the true danger they were in. The pressure on the ground was immense. Northwest Orient, the FBI, and local police worked frantically. They had to gather the exact amount of money in the specified bills. They had to find the parachutes. This wasn't easy. Civilian parachutes of the type he likely wanted weren't just lying around. Time was of the essence. Cooper had given them a deadline. He expected his demands to be met when they landed in Seattle. Any deviation could have disastrous consequences. The tension was building, both in the air and on the ground. Everyone hoped for a peaceful resolution. The flight continued towards Seattle. For most passengers, it was still just a slightly delayed flight. They were unaware of the drama unfolding just rows away. The flight attendants, especially Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow, who also dealt directly with Cooper, showed incredible courage. They acted as intermediaries. They relayed messages. They tried to keep Cooper calm. They did all this while hiding their own fear. The cockpit crew focused on flying the plane and communicating with air traffic control and the company. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Every minute felt like an hour. On the ground, the scramble was intense. FBI agents and airline officials raced against time. Locating $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills was a significant logistical challenge. Banks had to be contacted. The money had to be gathered and verified. Sourcing the 4 parachutes was equally difficult. Authorities eventually obtained them from a local skydiving school. There was debate about whether to provide dummy parachutes, but the risk was deemed too high. They had to assume Cooper knew what he was looking for. The safety of the hostages was paramount. Every decision was critical. Finally, Flight 305 began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper gave specific instructions for the landing. He wanted the plane to taxi to a remote, isolated part of the tarmac, away from the main terminals, away from other aircraft. He wanted the area to be well lit. He was clearly thinking ahead, controlling every aspect of the situation. As the plane touched down around 5:39 p.m., the authorities were in position. The airport was on high alert. The next phase of Cooper's plan was about to begin. The delivery of the ransom was imminent. Once the Boeing 727 came to a halt in the designated spot, Cooper issued further orders. He wanted the cabin lights dimmed. This was likely to prevent anyone outside from seeing clearly into the plane. He insisted that only one person approach the aircraft to deliver the money and parachutes. He remained incredibly composed. He seemed to be anticipating every move. The crew, following his instructions, prepared for the exchange. The lives of the remaining passengers and some crew members still hung in the balance. The tense standoff on the Seattle tarmac had begun. The Boeing 727 sat silent on the remote, brightly lit tarmac at Seattle-Tacoma. Inside, Dan Cooper remained a figure of calm command. He had the money. He had the parachutes. Now what? The remaining passengers were still on board, mostly unaware of the full extent of the danger. They only knew there was a serious problem. Cooper, through flight attendant Tina Mucklow, gave his instructions, and he wanted the passengers off. One moment, they were hostages. The next, they were walking down the air stairs to safety. Two flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and Alice Hancock, were also allowed to leave. As they stepped onto the tarmac, they were quickly met by FBI agents. But Cooper was still on that plane, still in charge. The plane needed to be refueled for a long flight. Destination Mexico City. They pointed to one thing: he was planning to jump. Section 2. A new course, a solitary preparation. The refueled Boeing 727 prepared for its second takeoff that night. Only a skeleton crew remained on board with Cooper. Captain William Scott was at the controls. First Officer Bill Radixak was his co-pilot. Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson monitored the systems. And brave Tina Mucklow was the sole flight attendant. She was Cooper's only direct link in the cabin. The pressure on this small crew was immense. They were flying into the unknown with a hijacker who was about to attempt something incredibly dangerous. Around 7:40 p.m., the plane taxied and lifted off into the stormy black sky. Once airborne and heading south, Cooper gave his final instructions to Tina Mucklow. He told her to go into the cockpit and stay there with the other crew members. He wanted to be alone in the passenger cabin. He didn't want any witnesses to what he was about to do. Tina did as she was told, joining the pilots. The cockpit door was closed. Cooper now had the entire rear of the aircraft to himself. He began his final preparations. The cabin would have been dark, except for the dim emergency lights. He was utterly alone with the money and the parachutes. Methodically, Cooper must have started to prepare for his jump. He had 4 parachutes to choose from. He likely selected the best main parachute and a reserve. Then came the challenge of the money. $200,000 in 20s is a bulky, heavy load. It would have weighed over 20 pounds. He had to secure this money to his body somehow. Perhaps he used part of a parachute harness, or cord he might have brought. Doing this alone in the dim light of a moving, vibrating aircraft cabin would have been incredibly difficult. He was focused. He was determined. His knowledge of the Boeing 727 was evident again. He knew about the aft air stairs. This unique feature, a staircase at the tail of the plane, could be opened in flight. It was perfect for a bailout. He instructed the crew, likely through the plane's intercom system or by a prior arrangement with Tina, on how to configure the plane for the jump. He then ordered the aft stairs to be lowered. In the cockpit, the crew would have seen a warning light illuminate. They would have felt a change in cabin pressure. They knew. Cooper was getting ready to leave their aircraft in the most dramatic way possible. Section 3. The Leap into the Dark Unknown. The moment arrived sometime after 8 p.m. The Boeing 727 was flying through a fierce storm. Below was the rugged, pitch-black wilderness of southwestern Washington state. The temperature outside was well below freezing. At the rear of the plane, Cooper faced a maelstrom. The wind roar was deafening, the cold biting. He stood at the edge, ransom money strapped to him. He was about to take a leap into history. Inside the cockpit, the flight crew felt a pressure bump. The aft stairway indicator light confirmed the stairs were down. They were under strict orders from Cooper not to leave the cockpit. They couldn't see what was happening. They could only imagine the scene unfolding in the rear of their plane. There was no way to know for sure. They continued to fly the aircraft according to Cooper's last instructions. The uncertainty must have been agonizing for them. The pilots kept the plane on its prescribed course towards Reno. They flew on for some time before they felt it might be safe enough to investigate, or perhaps they waited until they were much closer to Reno. The exact sequence of events in these moments remains a little hazy. When the plane landed at Reno, it was immediately surrounded. Law enforcement, FBI agents, everyone was on high alert. But when they boarded the aircraft, the main cabin was empty. Dan Cooper was gone. All that remained were 2 of the 4 parachutes he'd demanded, and the indentations in the seat where he had sat. The ransom money was gone. His briefcase was gone. He had jumped out into the freezing, stormy night. The authorities knew immediately they had a massive problem on their hands. How do you find one man, in the dark, in such terrain? Section 1. The Vast, Empty Search. When Flight 305 landed in Reno, authorities were ready. They surrounded the Boeing 727, heavily armed agents prepared to board. But inside, the cabin was eerily quiet. Dan Cooper was gone. He had vanished into the night. Left behind were 2 parachutes, his black tie and cigarette butts. Where had he jumped? The FBI had a colossal search on their hands. The hunt for D.B. Cooper had begun. The potential drop zone was immense. Cooper had jumped somewhere between Seattle and Reno. This covered a huge swath of rugged wilderness in southwestern Washington state. Think dense forests, steep mountains, and fast-flowing rivers. This was not an easy place to look for anything. The timing, late November, made it even worse. The weather was turning foul. Cold rain, sleet, and even snow at higher elevations were common. It was a hostile environment for any searcher. Hundreds of searchers fanned out. FBI agents teamed up with local police departments. Soldiers from nearby Fort Lewis were called in to help. They used fixed-wing aircraft to scour the landscape from above. On the ground, teams moved slowly. They conducted grid searches, trying to cover every square inch. It was exhausting, painstaking work. Searchers faced thick underbrush, slippery slopes, and harsh weather. They were looking for any sign, a piece of parachute, discarded clothing, or a body. The massive search operation continued, but they found nothing. Not a single trace of Dan Cooper, no sign of his parachute, no shred of the ransom money. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the stormy night air. The frustration among investigators must have been immense. They had thrown everything they had at the search. Yet the wilderness held its secrets tight. The lack of any discovery only fueled the growing legend. Had he made a clean getaway? Or had the wild, unforgiving land already claimed him? One of the first oddities of the case was the name itself. The hijacker bought his ticket as Dan Cooper. Yet, very quickly, the media began calling him D.B. Cooper. This likely happened because of a communication mix-up. A reporter might have been trying to check leads on men named Cooper. He might have called police asking about a D. Cooper or similar, and the D.B. just stuck. It's a small detail, really, but D.B. Cooper sounded more mysterious. It had a certain ring to it. And so the legend was christened with a name that wasn't even his chosen alias for the flight. Back on the plane, investigators collected what little evidence Cooper left behind. There were 8 Raleigh cigarette butts in the ashtray. There was his black clip-on tie, and there was a mother-of-pearl tie clip. The FBI lab went to work on these items. They hoped to find fingerprints, DNA, or any clue to his identity. The tie, in particular, became a subject of later, more advanced analysis. Tiny particles found on it suggested he might have worked in a specific industry. But in 1971, forensic science wasn't what it is today. These meager clues offered tantalizing hints, but no smoking gun. The FBI launched one of the most extensive and expensive investigations in its history. They chased down thousands of leads. They interviewed countless people across the country. Composite sketches of Cooper, based on the recollections of the flight attendants, were widely circulated. Many men resembled the man in the drawings. The Bureau built a profile. He was likely in his mid-40s, calm under pressure and not a fool. He seemed to have some knowledge of airplanes and possibly parachuting, but the sheer number of potential suspects was overwhelming. Many were quickly ruled out, but the list remained long. Various types of individuals came under scrutiny. Were his actions those of a seasoned criminal? Or perhaps a desperate man pushed to the edge? Some theories pointed towards disgruntled veterans, possibly with paratrooper training from the military. Others wondered if he might have been an airline employee, someone with inside knowledge. Several people even confessed to being D.B. Cooper over the years. However, their stories usually fell apart under questioning. The FBI had to painstakingly separate the real leads from the cranks and publicity seekers. It was a slow, grinding process with few breakthroughs. Did D.B. Cooper survive that jump? Experts have argued for decades. He seemed to know what he was doing. He chose a plane with aft stairs. He specified a low altitude and speed, but he jumped into a storm at night, over rough terrain, wearing a business suit, using a training chute. In February 1980, something remarkable happened. An 8-year-old boy found decaying $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. Did Cooper perish there, or lose the money during his escape? The discovery added to the mystery. The Tenabar money breathed new life into theories. The case remains unsolved. The legend of D.B. Cooper is stronger than ever. Did he pull off the perfect crime, or meet a lonely end in the wilderness? The mystery keeps us talking. The daring escapade of D.B. Cooper wasn't just a fleeting headline. No, his jump into the stormy night left a permanent mark, especially on the world of aviation. Before Cooper, air travel was a different beast. Security was much more relaxed. Cooper exploited that very openness. He showed just how vulnerable the system was. Airlines and the FAA started to rethink everything. Cockpit doors began to be secured. Passenger screening became more rigorous. Cooper's act was a definite wake-up call. The Cooper vane was invented. It prevents the aft air stairs from being lowered in flight. No one wanted a repeat performance. Cooper's hijacking changed the psychological landscape of flying. He forced a new era of vigilance upon the world of aviation. So, what became of the man who called himself Dan Cooper? Did he survive that perilous leap into the raging storm? Or did the unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest claim him? Despite exhaustive investigations, the case remains unsolved. D.B. Cooper remains a ghost, a legend written in the wind. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video if you enjoyed it.